Totally different people have become in the sense most sacred, frightful, and unanswerable, one flesh. If a golden-haired Scandinavian girl has married a very swarthy Jew, the Scandinavian side of the family may say till they are blue in the face that the baby has his mother's nose or his mother's eyes. They can never be certain the black-haired Bedouin is not present in every feature, in every inch. In the person of the baby he may have gently pulled his wife's nose. In the person of the baby he may have partly blacked his wife's eyes. Those are the three first facts of heredity: that it exists, that it is subtle and made of a million elements, that it is simple and cannot be unmade into those elements. To summarise, you know there is wine in the soup. You do not know how many wines there are in the soup, because you do not know how many wines there are in the world. And you never will know, because all chemists, all cooks, and all common-sense people tell you that the soup is of such a sort that it can never be chemically analysed. That is a perfectly fair parallel to the heredity element in the human soul. There are many ways in which one can feel that there is wine in the soup, as in a sudden tasting of a wine specially favoured. That corresponds to seeing suddenly flash on the young face the image of some ancestor you have known. But even then the taster cannot be certain he is not tasting one familiar wine among many unfamiliar ones, or seeing one known ancestor among a million unknown ancestors. Another way is to get drunk on the soup, which corresponds to the case of those who say they are driven to sin and death by hereditary doom. But even then the drunkard cannot be certain it was the soup, any more than the traditional drunkard who is certain it was the salmon. Those are the facts about heredity which anyone can see. The upshot of them is not only that a miss is as good as a mile, but a miss is as good as a win. If the child has his parents' nose or noses, that may be heredity. But if he has not, that may be heredity too. And as we need not take heredity lightly, because two generations differ, so we need not take heredity a scrap more seriously, because two generations are similar. The thing is in there. In what cases we know not, in what proportion we know not, and we cannot know. Now it is just here that the decent difference of function between Dr. Saleeby's trade and mine comes in. It is his business to study human health and sickness as a whole, in a spirit of more or less enlightened guesswork, and it is perfectly natural that he should allow for heredity here, there, and everywhere, as a man climbing a mountain or sailing a boat will allow for weather without even explaining it to himself. An utterly different attitude is incumbent on any conscientious man writing about what laws should be enforced or about how commonwealths should be governed. And when we consider how plain a fact is murder, and yet how hesitant and even hazy we all grow about the guilt of a murderer, when we consider how simple an act is stealing, and yet how hard it is to convict and punish those rich commercial pirates who steal the most, when we consider how cruel and clumsy the law can be, even about things as old and plain as the Ten Commandments, I simply cannot conceive any responsible person proposing to legislate on our broken knowledge and bottomless ignorance of heredity. But though I have to consider this dull matter in its due logical order, it appears to me that this part of the matter has been settled, and settled in a most masterly way, by somebody who has infinitely more right to speak on it than I have. Our press seems to have a perfect genius for fitting people with caps that don't fit, and affixing the wrong terms of eulogy and even the wrong terms of abuse. And just as people will talk of Bernard Shaw as a naughty winking Pierrot, when he is the last great Puritan and really believes in respectability, just as si parva licet, etc., they will talk of my own paradoxes when I pass my life in preaching that the truisms are true, so an enormous number of newspaper readers seem to have it fixed firmly in their heads that Mr. H. G. Wells is a harsh and horrible Eugenist in great goblin spectacles, who wants to put us all into metallic microscopes and dissect us with metallic tools. As a matter of fact, of course, Mr. Wells, so far from being too definite, is generally not definite enough. He is an absolute wizard in the appreciation of atmospheres and the openings of vistas, but his answers are more agnostic than his questions. His books will do everything except shut. And so far from being the sort of man who would stop a man from propagating, he cannot even stop a full stop. He is not eugenic enough to prevent the black dot at the end of a sentence from breeding a line of little dots. But this is not the clear-cut blunder of which I spoke. The real blunder is this. Mr. Wells deserves a tiara of crowns and a garland of medals for all kinds of reasons. But if I were restricted on grounds of public economy to giving Mr. Wells only one medal, ob civis servito, I would give him a medal as the eugenist who destroyed eugenics. For every one spoke of him, rightly or wrongly, as a eugenist, and he certainly had, as I have not, the training and type of culture required to consider the matter merely in a biological and not in a generally moral sense. The result was that in that fine book, Mankind in the Making, where he inevitably came to grips with the problem, he threw down to the eugenist an intellectual challenge which seems to me unanswerable, but which at any rate is unanswered. I do not mean that no remote eugenist wrote upon the subject, for it is impossible to read all writings, especially eugenist writings. I do mean that the leading eugenists write as if this challenge had never been offered. The gauntlet lies unlifted on the ground. Having given honour for the idea where it is due, I may be permitted to summarise it myself for the sake of brevity. Mr. Wells' point was this: that we cannot be certain about the inheritance of health, because health is not a quality. It is not a thing like darkness in the hair or length in the limbs. It is a relation, a balance. You have a tall, strong man, but his very strength depends on his not being too tall for his strength. You catch a healthy, full-blooded fellow, but his very health depends on his being not too full of blood. A heart that is strong for a dwarf will be weak for a giant. A nervous system that would kill a man with a trace of certain illness will sustain him to 90 if he has no trace of that illness. Nay, the same nervous system might kill him if he had an excess of some other comparatively healthy thing. Seeing, therefore, that there are apparently healthy people of all types, it is obvious that if you mate two of them, you may even then produce a discord out of two inconsistent harmonies. It is obvious that you can no more be certain of a good offspring than you can be certain of a good tune if you play two fine airs at once on the same piano. You can be even less certain of it in the more delicate case of beauty, of which the eugenists talk a great deal. Marry two handsome people whose noses tend to the aquiline, and their baby, for all you know, may be a goblin with a nose like an enormous parrot's. Indeed, I actually know a case of this kind. The eugenist has to settle not the result of fixing one steady thing to a second steady thing, but what will happen when one toppling and dizzy equilibrium crashes into another. This is the interesting conclusion. It is on this degree of knowledge that we are asked to abandon the universal morality of mankind. When we have stopped the lover from marrying the unfortunate woman he loves, when we have found him another uproariously healthy female whom he does not love in the least, even then we have no logical evidence that the result may not be as horrid and as dangerous as if he had behaved like a man of honour. The end of chapter 6.